Okay, so as Gauss alluded to, we're going to be talking heavy soil, and these are the soils that are alkaline, they're sodic, and they're very dense. And yes, as a result, they prove a fair challenge for yield improvement and maintaining any consistency. Now, a challenge that you guys have in the next 20 minutes at least, I'll let Craig worry about himself, but is remaining awake. If you feel yourself dropping off, stand up. I don't mind. It's not going to interrupt me. If you do drop off, I'll probably make an example of you, so be warned. Okay, let's get right to the nub. Your take-home messages for today are that ripping is not providing a yield increase, so perhaps consider not bothering to spend the time and money. Talk to your farmer about the fact that there's no AdBlue and that diesel is going to be hard to clean out of your engine if you've got no AdBlue. Surface applied gypsum it does help your soil properties, and it is something that you can go away from this talk, I'm hoping, and talk to your growers about. The other thing about that is when we're applying gypsum, we've got some good numbers around where we're going to see a positive response. So exchangeable sodium percentage greater than 10% is good chance that you're going to have response to any applied gypsum. Now I'm also going to talk to you about mounding with and without covers. Okay, currently without covers it's proving ineffective. However, a bit of a watch this space. The sand or the surface mulching of this soil type is showing quite a bit of promise. Okay, let's start at the start because I want you to all be up to speed on the soils that I'm talking about. They're sodic, means they've got a high sodium content, and the literature tells us that a high sodium content is greater than 6%. Okay, that's having an impact. They are generally alkaline, so greater than 8.1 pH and pH of water. Okay, those two factors, both the sodicity and the alkalinity, are combining to give us dispersion. This is what happens when you drop a small soil clod in a little petri dish of DI water, and boop, all of a sudden, within 10 minutes, they'd all fallen to bits. And now that's coming from a depth of 40 centimetres. Okay, so down at that depth, there's probably very few soil pores, roots aren't getting into it. The other thing that's going on down at that depth is we've got a pretty heavy penetrometer resistance. Our strengths at that depth are in excess of 2.5 megapascals. One of the other things that may go undiagnosed, particularly if you're someone like me who's new to the area of soils, is that transient salinity is also an issue in these soils. So that's that salt that's in that layer that can't get below this dense layer, and when it gets wet, it's coming up and interacting with the roots, and it is ultimately destroying your yield. Okay, so those are the things that we've got. If we break it down into areas that we can look at, that we can actually tackle, the first one being, can we add water? And I'm being a little bit facetious. I'm not saying can we just go and irrigate, because we all know that that's not possible. We've got to manage what we have. And another one of those areas that we can look at is changing the chemistry. How do we get that pH down? How do we get rid of some of that sodium in the soil? And perhaps the easiest one that we always go to is breaking up that soil strength through ripping. Right, I'm going to start with changing the chemistry by adding some gypsum to that chemistry. And as I said, the takeaway from this little image is this percentage here. We've got average exchangeable sodium percent across the bottom, a relative yield on the side. This comes from work that Dave Hall and Jeremy Lemon did and presented at the updates in 2019. The upshot of which is that once we get above 10%, we start to see a great deal great deal more response to where we've applied gypsum. Now, I was talking about 6% in my opening as being high sodium percentages, but in that range, it's really quite cloudy as to whether, gypsum's going to help us there or not. I don't have a good answer for you as to what we do in that zone right now, but I can tell you that we have a pretty high confidence around that 10% because running a sensitivity analysis over it, thank you very much to Craig Scanlon for getting that to me at 6:30 yesterday morning, we saw that from these numbers, around 9.8, ESP of 9.8, anything greater than, we start to see that response. So there we are. The literature, well, the current recommendations, if you go by what the calculations in the literature suggest you do, for some of these soils, we're looking at more than 20 tonnes to the hectare, up to 30 tonnes to the hectare or more on those soils. And of course, none of us are going to achieve that because it's completely out of realms. Right now, we're probably applying 5 tonnes to the hectare max. Even that is pretty costly. And I'd suggest that your recommendations are probably somewhere around 2.5 tonnes to the hectare. Okay, let's go to the low-hanging fruit. Well, in the work that I've done in these soil types, I haven't had any positive response. That's across work that was done at Beacon, work at Merredin, work at Canna and at Minginoo on those soils that show the hassles that we've got. Okay, we have had a bit of a journey. So why did I keep pushing the envelope? Well, why did I keep going down that old road with ripping? And it was because we felt that in the past our ripping was bringing up too much of the subsoil, bringing that sodic soil to the surface, destroying our surface, and that was why we were seeing all these negative responses. Okay, what if we rip but we keep it below the surface? And that's what that image there is. That's a paraplow. Some of you will have heard me talk about it. It's a slant tine ripper. It has a lot more vertical lift and a lot less forward movement. The hope was we just lift it and leave it at that depth, and Bob's your uncle, we've fractured it, it's all good. No, unfortunately it isn't. We can't seem to get a consistent positive response to ripping on these soils. 2020, this is the trial at Canna. I have ripped, but I've also added some nutrients down the profile here, and these nutrients are on the surface. Nil rip with nitrogen, 2020 gave us our largest yield response. The variability at this site discounted that response from being a significant one because it was so variable. The other thing about it is putting these nutrients down the profile, we had hoped, we thought perhaps in that year 1 we'll get those roots into the profile and we'll keep it open, we'll have these root pathways. Year 2 we'll come back and we'll see some evidence of that. Well, we haven't certainly seen it in the yield results, and we haven't seen it in the root assessments that I've done. Spent a number of hours staring at a pit face, assessing root abundance, and we haven't seen that continuation. So after year 1, this soil has gone back to what it was before. Now that photo, you might cast your minds back to that little petri dish and at 40 centimetres, those things, that's where it's come from. It's come from this site here. It's a fairly loamy soil, it's reasonably productive. pHs in the subs are high 7s, but they're not extravagant. But that dispersion that you saw in the petri dish, yeah, that's what's the hassle with this one. Okay, we'll go to Minginoo. The story's much the same, but even less response. 2 years in a row, haven't seen anything to ripping at that response. Granted, had pretty good seasons in 2 seasons, the last 2 seasons, but even then, there's nothing in it. And it just backs up the other trial work that we've had, the stuff that we've had at Merredin, the stuff we've had at Beacon. These soils aren't giving us that response that we need. And I'm not sure why I keep coming over here because there's no buttons to push here. Okay, let's have a look at that other lever that we might be able to pull, which is adding water. And like I said, we're not talking about irrigating, we're talking about how we might manage the water that we get. Now, what you're looking at here is the barley that was grown on the trial at Merredin. This one was grown without mounding, and this one was grown with mounding. And that's what these two words mean. The conventional is the short one, and the hats is the mounding, but it says hats for a reason, because those mounds that we've mounded up have got a plastic sheet across the top and creating a watershed. So this one sown on 375 millimetres, this one sown on 375 millimetres with the mound in between, so that, and it has a hat on it, so it's got a watershed. Okay, well, there's certainly some promise there. I'm happy to take a 45% yield increase if we're able to achieve that. So, no mounds with hats on. Now, the hats, as I alluded to, are an important part of the picture, because it's the hats that not only cause us watershed, but it gives us some protection from evaporation. Okay, so we investigated this area as well. We looked at how we might create some improvement in water runoff from those mounds, and we added some polymers to that surface, because we're not going to be able to roll out miles and miles of plastic over these mounds. What's something that we might be able to achieve? And that's using polymers. So we have two different polymers here: plastic, a higher rate of polymer 2, and our control. What we're looking at is our water content of the soil. This is our control, our nil. So that's what's happening under the soil, under the furrow, where we don't have any mounding or any plastic. Is that right, Rushna? So look around. There's no mounds on these ones, Rushna? There is mounds, I beg your pardon. So that has been mounded. Whereas these have been mounded, but they've also got plastic on, covers on. So you'll notice that the polymers have had a far greater influence on water, maintaining water in the soil. Now there's a reason for that, because that plastic, because it's not surface-to-surface contact, it's actually creating a little bit of a warmer environment there, and it's driving some evaporation. So the plastic sheeting is actually causing us some evaporation under there, and we're losing some water that way. Okay, maybe we go away from the plastics and we look at what we can actually do, and the polymers, which are exorbitantly expensive at the rates that we need. What if we look at the mulches? Now, we've all seen the mulches, because we can grow them, it comes out the back of the header, it lands in a big heap, and next year everyone goes, oh, why doesn't the whole paddock look like that when the crop's coming up? And that's because not only have we got nutrients in there, but we've also got more water, because we've been able to mulch it, keep that, any summer rainfall, any previous rainfall, keep the moisture in that surface. We've broken that, we've broken the capillary action into the surface, and that's what our organic mulches have done. That's what the header's done. What happens when you get a front-end loader bucket full of rocks or gravel stones, and you drive that out across the paddock and dump it in a strip? Well, if you're keen to do that across your whole paddock, it's quite a sizable return, but it would take a bit of time, I imagine. So Ravensthorpe, 2020, this little area where we had that, and I have to stress, it's an inert thing. This is a bucket full of gravel stones. There's no clay in it. We have 3.5 tonne right alongside a 1.6 tonne crop in that circumstance. Take it into the lab, put it in a pot, add some water to it, put a couple of bits of gravel over the top. So this is exactly what Dave Hall has done. And it's perhaps, I'm remiss in acknowledging both all of the team. So it's Dave Hall, Rushna Munir, Ed Barrett Leonard, Glenn Reithmuller and myself, and we are all sitting under this funky GRDC code. So where you see that, just think of all of us, because it's their data that I'm presenting today. Okay, back to the story. didn't really matter what you had over the top. We've only lost about 300 millimetres of moisture out of our little pot in the glass house compared to 1.3 litres of water over the in a pot that has no covering. So clearly we're onto something there, if that's the only mechanism. So take it to a bigger scale, get a farmer with some big ideas and a big bucket of sand and spread it across the paddock. So he's applied this at 2 and 4 centimetres with some gypsum, 2.5 and 5 tonnes gypsum. What we're seeing from this work is that, yes, there's a considerable change in emergence, and there is greater yield potential set up. Interestingly, what I need to note is that this is an alkaline loamy duplex. And if we're keeping a water in on a duplex, a year like this one, you get a bit of waterlogging. Now that was an unintended consequences of extra water, but that's what happened this year. So in the duplex soil, we kept a bit more water there. And so, you know, but having said that, we did see some pretty significant biomass cuts come from that this year. Okay, I'm just going to wind back just a little bit into that other lever that I talked about at the start, which was the gypsum lever. And I spoke to you about, you know, currently we're only recommending 2.5 to 5 tonnes per hectare, when really we're probably needing more than 30 or thereabouts. Now, this is a series of soil samples that were taken from beneath old gypsum heaps. Aidan Sinnott from VRT Solutions in Esperance was seeing these amazing responses on some pretty hostile sodic soils at Salmon Gums, where the gypsum dump had been. There was some fantastic growth. He went back there and sampled the depth under those, and you can see just what it's been able to achieve. That level, granted, this is 8 years after it's been applied, so these dumps are 8 years old. We've shifted our sodium percentage from being quite negative in the surface and most of the subsurface, shifted that sodium right down into the profile, along with some of that boron. You can see that's leached out there and probably ended up at 60, 70. And because gypsum is acidifying, we've reduced our alkalinity in that soil considerably, as well as change our calcium-magnesium ratio on the surface. Our calcium's not leaching through on that slide, but okay, we're going to, a lot of work coming out of New South Wales, Victoria at the moment, showing us some amazing responses to subsoil burial of organic matter and gypsum, and some fun things like chicken manure and stuff. And so Dave Hall's taken that on board and he's gone, right, well, we'll do it at Lake Grace. We'll have 3 dry years in a row, but we will bury composted chicken manure. We will bury loosened straw. We'll put all those good things down there. 3 years in a row, decile 1, no significant differences. 4th year, very wet year, fantastic. We're going to see something. We haven't seen a significant yield improvement over time with those treatments on that soil. So, jury's still out a little bit there. I'm going to quickly talk to you about a bit more, bringing some of those ideas together in a little bit more of a real-world situation. So this is at Merredin. We've mounded. We haven't put any coverings on these mounds because that's you're not going to do that in a real-world situation. We've sown our mounds on 375. We've sown our conventionals, or non-mounds, on 225. We have also deep ripped. So we have nil mounds and mounds, ripping and no ripping, gypsum and no gypsum. When I say gypsum, we put a little bit with the seed because we have seen responses to micro amounts of gypsum in the furrow. Okay, there's an an electrolyte response happening in the furrow, and it's a once-off. Okay, so it's not going to achieve any long-term benefit. It's in for that year only. 2-tonne yield this year off our nil mounded, nil rip, and nil gypsum. Pretty good benchmark to start with. I thought we might do better than that, so I added a rip to that, and it repeats the story I started with, which is that our ripping isn't actually affecting. It's given us a significant decrease in yield. Okay, no worries perhaps if we've added or we've changed our water management on that and tried to keep it into the furrow, just like Kerry was going to tell me about. No, nothing benefit there either. So unfortunately, we put all of those tools together in a real-world situation, and we haven't been able to achieve what we thought we might have been able to. Now, earlier on, when we took biomass cuts, there was pretty big, healthy yield of biomass weight differences, and our ripping was certainly up there for having provided us a lot of biomass, but it just hasn't been able to fill it. So this is my closing slide. You've seen it all before. I can run through it pretty quickly. So as you saw, ripping isn't providing us a consistent yield response. Surface applied gypsum is perhaps the best thing for you to talk about with your growers when you get home, and talk to them about and think about those soils that have got an ESP of greater than 10, that you're going to have, kick some goals on those pretty quickly. In the future, we'll think about mounding and we'll think about surface mulching, because they both look promising. We've just got to get them from there to the field and make them profitable. Thank you.